Hello everyone, it is Press Any Button and we are back in Unity, back with better audio and back with another tutorial. And in this part we're going to be looking at how we can move around these enemies and how we can group them so that we have that classic structure that we usually see in a lot of Space Invaders games. So if you recall last lesson, what we did, I'll just go into play mode, is that we sorted out these idle animations for alien number 1, 2 and 3. And what we're going to do in this lesson, which I'll show you right now, is we're going to structure these and then start moving them around our scene. So right here you can see that I've got all of my enemies in a type of formation, and this is the regular formation you'd see in your usual Space Invaders game. So right here we've got 2 rows of alien number 3, in the middle we've got 2 rows of alien number 1, and right at the top we've got alien number 2, and that's just going to be a single row. We'll talk about our flying saucer friend some other time, but right now let's get this sorted and see how you can get this structure in your own game and move your own enemies around. Okay, so without further introduction, let's get straight into things. Okay, so as we started off, we've got alien number 1, 2 and 3 right here, and these are all prefab objects. I'm just going to deselect the main camera so that we have a clear view of all of our aliens, and we're just going to take a nice good look at them, and we're going to reference that formation that we had earlier. I'm not going to keep it in the hierarchy because I know what the structure is, but let's just take a look at what we're working with here. So as I said before, we want alien number 3 at the bottom and we want 2 rows of that. So how we're going to do this is we're going to move these out of the way and we're going to start making copies of the prefabs that we've pasted in. So I'm going to hit Control C and then Control V. And as I hit Control V, what I'm trying to do is make about 4 more copies of our aliens. So in total we want 5 copies of alien 3 in our scene. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we're going to move some of these copies over a little bit. And this would be a good time to turn on the main camera again, just to get an idea of the space that we're dealing with. Okay, so we've got our original alien 3 at -2, and so are the other ones. So let's move them by a value of about 0.1. And that seems suitable for what we're trying to achieve here. So for the next one, we're going to make that 0 on the x-axis. We're going to make this +1 on the x-axis. And for our last one over here, we're going to make that +2 on the x-axis. And then we're going to move these down by a certain value. So let's think about how we can structure this properly without having any issues with our empty game object, which is going to be the container for all of our enemies. So these alien 3 rows are not found in the middle of our alien formation. So we can just move them to the bottom out of the way. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first select them, hit Control C and Control V, and then move these down on the y-axis by a value of about 1. Make sure we haven't selected the main camera or anything. I think everything's alright there. And move that down to -1 on the y-axis. And then let's select 5 first, hold shift, click on 9, and with that done, let's move this down to -2 on the y-axis. And that gives us space to work with our middle row. And our middle row, as we can see down here, is made up of alien number 1. So I'm going to take this object and I'm going to move it to origin. And I can do this easily by hitting reset on the cog, but I need to make sure I always take that to 4 on the z-axis once I've done that. And also, if you've got any issues with your hierarchy, or if there's anything that shouldn't be there that is there, like this main camera, just make sure you delete those really quickly so we can continue without any issues. As we did before, let's just copy this. So Control C once you've selected the game object, Control V 4 times, and here we can see that we've got multiple copies of alien 4. I'm going to arrange that in a different way. I'm going to drag these up next to where it says alien 1 on the hierarchy, just to make sure we don't get confused about anything. And then I'm going to start to move these around. So I'm going to move this to -2. I'm going to move this one to -1. It doesn't really matter where you place them, it just matters that you have the right formation. And then I'm going to move this final alien to 2. And again, let's copy these, Control C, Control V, and with that done, we can take these copies to 1 on the y-axis, and we've got our middle and second to top row done already. So this is actually the easiest part of the tutorial. The last thing that we need to do in terms of structuring our aliens is to take this little alien and move him to 2 on the y-axis, take him to origin, Control C, Control V 4 times, and here we see that our copies appear at the bottom of the hierarchy. Drag this right up there until we find 2, place them there as you like. So 1 here, we've already got a 0, so -1, -2. And let's just do a quick check to make sure that these aren't the children of any game objects, because that's exactly what we're going to do right now, and we might muddle things up if we already have that happening, that one animation is the child of another. So in our hierarchy, let's just go to this create tab and then create empty, and now we've got our empty game object. And as you saw, I called my game object enemy container. You can call that enemy container also. I'll just call this enemy container 2. And the purpose of enemy container is to group together all of our animations and control the uniform motion of all of these different components. But just before we group all of our objects under this one empty game object, let's make sure that its transformation values are correct for what we want to be working with. So we're going to reset its transformation, and now it's 0 on the z-axis and we want that to be 4. It's at origin where we want it to be. And then let's select all of our aliens. So select the first one, hold shift, and then click on the last one, and then drag that on top of our enemy container. And right now you can see that all of our enemies have been grouped together, and we can even hide them just to make our hierarchy a bit cleaner. The next thing we're going to do is look at how that lines up in comparison to the main camera. And then we're going to take a look at our cube game object, because as you remember with this game object, it destroys anything that leaves it, and we want to make sure that our enemies are A, not leaving the view of the main camera, and B, not leaving the area of this cube. So let's go into our game view and make sure that everything is on the right axis in terms of the z-axis. All of the alien transformations on the z-axis have been switched back to origin in relation to our enemy container, which is 4, so we can see that in the game view. And the first thing we're going to do is select a starting point for our enemies. So let's just experiment with this a little bit. If we move the transformation on the x-axis by about 0.5, we see that our enemies are nowhere near touching the edge of this cube and are actually quite comfortably within the boundaries of the main camera also. So then we're going to move it up on the y-axis and we can experiment with this. So no, yes, maybe, no, no, and that seems just right. So if we have 0.5 on the x-axis and 2.5 on the y-axis, that would be a really good starting point for us. But let me just lower this a little bit just to make sure that we've got space for that flying saucer that we're going to add later on. Not in this lesson, but in a later lesson. Okay, everything seems pretty good right now. Let's go back to the scene view and make sure that everything's right and everything is within the boundaries of our boundary that we've created. So, what's the next step? Well, we want that uniform motion. How are we going to achieve that? Now, the brilliant thing about Unity is that there's so many different ways in which you can do this, but one way that I thought would be pretty simple and would make a lot of sense would be just to animate the movement. Because what happens when we animate something is that its colliders and everything like that all move along with that animation. And you might be thinking, wait, I thought we could only do idle animations. But no, we can actually set it so that our animations change the transformation positions of our game objects, which is really interesting and really useful. So let's create an animation for our enemy container. We want to first select our enemy container, and then we're going to go to create, and this should open up a file window. And in our file window, I'm going to go to assets, and that's where the rest of our things are, and I'm going to call this container anim. Yeah, that's about right. And then just hit save. And as you remember, that's how we tell Unity that we want to animate this object. Now you might be thinking, oh, we've got no animations, we've got no sprites to work with, and I was thinking the same thing until I realized you can do one thing that's really useful, which is go to add property And then what are we going to change? We're going to change the transformation. So let's go to transformation. And we don't want rotation, we don't want scale, but we do want position. So we're going to add, so let me go back and show you what I actually clicked there, because I did that kind of fast. I actually clicked one of these plus signs that appeared next to the position option when it was here. Okay, now let's go back and take a look at this. So if someone were to ask you how Space Invaders move, what would your answer be? Would it be a nice, creamy, fluid, 60 frames per second animation? No, it'd be really blocky and jank, and that's what we're going to go for. Or if you prefer, I could say an 8-bit feel. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take our second node that we've been provided with, and we're going to drag that over to 15 samples. And here in the inspector we can see our transformation values as we normally would be able to. They are the same here. But let's change something. So I want my alien to move left a little bit, but not too much. So how about we take it to 0 on the x-axis? Actually, that's a bit too much. So how about 0.25 on the x-axis and keep it the same on the y-axis? Right, and then I'm going to take this down to 30 samples, and I'm going to make this the same. I'm going to make it 0.25 on the x-axis and 2 on the y-axis. And let's just take a look at what our animation's doing right now. Okay, so it's got a bit of that smoothness that we don't want. So how can we fix that? Well, I'll tell you right now actually. What you want to do is select one of your keyframes. So we're going to take this end keyframe, and then we're going to right click, go to both tangents and make these constant. And then if we look at our animation right now, we can see that we've got that retro jank that we've been looking for. And pretty much what you want to do for every frame that has a different transformation to the previous one is to add in that property of both tangents and then constant. So let me just demonstrate that right now, and as you can see we've got 2 jitters. So let's continue on with making that. I'm going to make the first line with all of you, and then I'll do the rest by myself, and we'll just close the tutorial with a final demonstration of everything that we've come up with in this lesson. And now that that's done, we can see how we can make our movement less smooth and more retro. But something that I noticed when putting this together is that we need to compile every single frame before we start messing around with what has constant tangents and what doesn't. So before you start to change all of those properties, make sure that you have each individual frame in, and we're just going to work on the first line, and hopefully you should get an idea of how you can move your enemies around the screen. So the next thing that we want to do after the last frame on this line is just to move it down by about 0.25 on the y-axis, and then continue in the same way that you've gone before. Anyway, I will see you at the end of this tutorial just to demonstrate everything that we've done in this session so far. Okay, so I did say that I would come back after finishing every single piece of animation, but I thought because I'm giving this package to you guys, I might as well give you the opportunity to finish things off yourself. Just before I send that off and close up this video, let's just talk about some rules for this animation. So for our first frame of animation, that's completely fine, that can just be standalone. And then once there's a change in our positioning, we want there to be another frame just behind that to keep our objects in the same place for a little bit of time so that they're not moving too fast. So if you take a look at this, you'll see that there's a little pause between each movement. Another rule is that we need to add another position marker every 15 frames, so just be conscious of that, and I hope you've practiced your 15 times tables. And finally, what we're going to do is going to go back to the hierarchy. We're going to select all of these, and then we're going to go down to these box colliders and make sure that is trigger is selected, and this will ensure that we can actually shoot our aliens once we're in the game. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so as you can see, all of the enemies are animating as intended, and they're moving around in their idle animations as they have a uniform motion, which is what we wanted. We don't have the barrier set up, but we know that those work already. And the next thing that we want to do, of course, is to get our enemies actually shooting at us and becoming a hazard. But before I close up the tutorial, one thing that we still need to consider is how far down our enemy container is going to travel, and that's going to be right up to the turret, or our tank game object right here. And once that happens, we're going to have a game over. But anyway, seeing that we've got all of our animations sorted and we're at a point where we can continue to just finish that off, I think it is a nice time to end this tutorial. As always, I want to thank you guys for the support. I want to thank you guys for watching and keeping up with the series. All the content that you see on my screen here will be accessible through a link that's in the description below. And if you feel like liking this video, go ahead, do so. If you want to subscribe, then go ahead, do that too. And as always, I will be back another time.